All right, we are live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of this series. I am so excited to have Shiraz Ahmed with me once again. Thank you so much for all those of you who have joined us for today's episode. Last week, Shiraz and I, we spoke to you guys about the technical side of entrepreneurship and how to start your business. And this week, we are going to be touching on a different subject, but still very similar. Today, we're going to be touching on the non technical side of entrepreneurship, right? We'll talk about the psychology of entrepreneurship. And this is a personal favorite topic of mine. So I'm really, really excited and looking forward to having this conversation with you, Shiraz. And I'm sure today the audience, whenever more and more people will be joining us, I'm really looking forward to getting a lot of engagement and people to come and ask us some really good questions and have a really good conversation. But before we begin, let me give a quick introduction of our guest today. Our guest in the house is Shiraz Ahmed, who is a founder and financial advisor and associate portfolio manager at the Sartorial Wealth Raymond James Limited. He is very, very passionate about helping individuals, entrepreneurs reach their business goals and find personal goals as well. He's extremely knowledgeable and skillful in the area of finance and entrepreneurship. He has honed those skills by working in the industry for the last 17 years. Yeah, that is a lot of a wealth of experience. So he's definitely the right man to be having this conversation with. And Shiraz also holds a Chartered Investment Management CIM designation, and he is among a select group of advisors that is licensed in Canada and US and registered both with IIROC and FINRA. So Shiraz, thank you so much for being here today. It's such a pleasure to host you.
Absolutely. No, it should be fun. I'm looking forward to it.
How's your day going? How's your week, in fact?
It's going well. I can't complain whatsoever. It's sunny. It's been a good week, so I can't complain.
That's awesome, man. Yeah, definitely. The weather has been pretty good for us. And hopefully lots of outdoor exercises and outdoor activities for you.
Absolutely.
So, as I said a few minutes ago, last week you and I, we went deep into the technical side of entrepreneurship and how to start a business. And in that episode last week, for those of you who are logged in and you have not watched that episode, I would highly recommend that you watch that at some time later. Schedule some time and definitely get put in some time in your calendar to watch that episode where Shiraz goes deep into the technicalities of starting a business. He speaks in that episode about business planning, how important that is, gives how important SWOT analysis is, running business canvas model, and then him and I, we also discussed the pros and cons of various business structures, such as whether you should incorporate or do a sole proprietorship or go into a partnership. And lastly, we also discussed the various ideas on raising capital, right? So today we're going to be talking about the non-technical side, the psychology of entrepreneurship and the psychology of running a business. So without any further ado, Shiraz, let's get started.
Sure.
Awesome. So Shiraz, Sorry?
Nothing. Let's jump in. Let's go for it.
All right. So Shiraz, you must have heard people say, that you should have an entrepreneurial mindset if you want to be an entrepreneur. What does entrepreneurial mindset even mean to you, and how would you define having an entrepreneurial mindset?
So it's a tough question to answer because I think depending on who you talk to, you'll get a different response.
Mm-hmm.
So in my personal opinion, I think entrepreneurial mindset is having very much a business first attitude and looking for effectively being creative about how you solve problems. I mean, that's effectively what entrepreneurs do is you find a problem, you find a clever or an innovative way to solve it. And ultimately, if it makes sense, other people can either benefit from that, whether it be a service or a product, it doesn't matter. That's kind of effectively what entrepreneurs do. So you're kind of like one part creator, so you have a really creative aspect of your mind, but then you're also one part sort of salesperson as well. And I think they're both really important. So there's a technical aspect or competency, depending on your industry and what it is that you're doing. But then there's that ultimate reality that I think every single one of us faces is that in being an entrepreneur, ultimately, we all have many hats to wear.
Yep.
One of the major hats that we all have to wear is you can have the greatest idea in the world, but if you have no one to share it with, well, then you have no business, right? So we all have to go out there and remember to sell. So this kind of reminds me of, frankly, the first piece of advice I ever got almost 20 years ago coming to the industry. It's a person who still to this day is my mentor. And I'm a big believer in mentorship, and that's a whole separate topic. We can talk about that. But he said this one quote that I will never forget. He says, "You can't teach somebody to walk 3 feet and say hello to somebody you don't know." What to say when you get there is the easy part, but you really can't make somebody or even teach someone how to go get out of their comfort zone and actually learn how to sell. That's one of those ingrained things that every one of us has to have. So I'm such a big believer in the fact that we all have so many hats. We have to juggle so many different things. But ultimately, I think the backbones of being an entrepreneur is an ability and a predisposition towards wanting to sell and share your story.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, when you think about entrepreneurship, people always somehow relate it to having the best ideas and focus on just having the best ideas out there. And to me, it's not just always about being an idea machine, right? To me, one of the key things in being what I say is that the best entrepreneurs don't always have the best ideas, but they are the best at understanding their customers and it's solving their problems. And to your point, that's what salesmanship is all about. Find out what is that problem that your customer is having and try to add value to their lives by solving that particular problem. So to that extent, how, if you are, and I'm sure you have done a lot of mentorship and coaching, how do you go about building entrepreneurs in your workplace?
So again, it really depends. I always say, the sort of the three things that you want to be looking at, and I'm a big believer in the rule of three, but it's what do I do, who do I do it for, and who cares, right? Or why does that matter? And the reason why I say it in that specific way, so obviously my mentor, my coach was one of the people who told that to me, but at the same time, it's extremely important because it makes you distill down what is my actual value proposition. What is it that I'm trying to sell or do, or what is my goal behind what I'm doing?
Yeah.
It's, who do I do it for? So who is my target? Who is my audience? What do I do? So it's being able to really accurately articulate your value, what it is that you're presenting. Then ultimately, who cares? So who is this for?
Who is this for? Yeah.
Right. So you need to really be digging in. And one of the things that you'll find that a lot of entrepreneurs fail that last piece. And a lot of my counterparts or people who are developing, that's the hardest part to do. It's why does that matter? So I always say it's the what's in it for them, right? So people naturally are selfish, right? So one of the best ways, in my personal and professional opinion, to sell is to do the exact opposite, be unselfish. Give without asking for anything in return, right? So if you give and just give, then people will either naturally self-select and become your ideal customer, or they won't, right? But so you can't convince somebody to be something that they're not. But that's where I find most people fail, is that they're pretty good at figuring out who their audience is. They're pretty good at figuring out what it is that they do, but it's very difficult to say, why does that matter? So why you versus everybody else who looks exactly like you, and not physically, I mean their service or their business is very similar to yours. We're all in relative value. Very rarely is there like a light bulb, new industry, new opportunity where there's no one else. There's always some sort of competition. So you always have to ask yourself, if the person sitting next to you is smarter than you, better than you, bigger than you, why should anyone choose you? So why you? And that's the hardest part. And if you can accurately identify that, you will absolutely win.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, and how it is a very, very difficult part. And I think everybody who's watching this episode can probably attest to that. Is there a way we can kind of simplify going about how to think about that particular why does it matter? Why am I the best person to solve this problem? Or how can I solve this problem the best? And then answering that why question, why does it matter? Is there a methodical way in which people can go about tackling this particular question?
So I actually think that there is. And I think the answer is to be introspective, like look inside and make it as personal as possible, because
Mm-hmm.
it's something that's usually truly very unique to the individual. A good example, again, that my coach once upon a time told me is, if you're talking, there's this one business person, he was a doctor, and
Yeah.
wanted to go out there, and he's an oncologist. His job was to help people
Okay.
with cancer. And one of the things that was important to him is really helping as many people. But he was trying to, struggling with growing his business. He was doing okay, but
Mm.
why wasn't he able to get to that next level? And what came from that, and what was really interesting, is that the moment that he went introspective and looked into his own personal circumstances, he lost a sibling when he was very young. And his value proposition was that no 10-year-old
Mm.
should ever bury his sister, right?
Wow.
And that is a powerful
That's
message.
deep.
It's deep. So part of these things is that look inside. Is that every one of us, we're all unique humans. We're all unique people. So there's probably something in you that only you and your certain set of experiences can really bring to the table. So that's why I think identifying the why does it matter, that is one. Because if you can say something as powerful as no 10-year-old should ever bury their sister, right? That is, I think, something that anybody can resonate. And then the moment that individual did that, his business just took off. So, it's really interesting when you look at these types of introspective type things, is that they're unique to the person, and it's really able to articulate that value in a way that anybody can truly understand. And it's not about relative value, is that that person is on a mission to solve
Mm.
that specific problem, and they'll do anything
Absolutely.
in their power to accomplish it.
That's so powerful, and I love that example. I really do. That of that oncologist is. Have you, in your experience, Shiraz, have you ever seen, and maybe you have in a lot of cases, you may have seen this. Do people undersell their experience and their story, or they just don't have the tools or capability to really discover the why and be introspective?
Well, again, it depends on the person. So I say that most people don't look deep enough. They'll talk about their
Mm.
technical capabilities. You'll almost see
Yeah.
everybody talks about, oh, I have, like you mentioned in my bio, like I have this designation, or I went to this school, or I did this, or this is what I've done for X number of years. But very rarely do they bring out right off the get-go that real personal, relatable story. And I think really ultimately this is all an art of storytelling, right? Is
Yeah.
how powerful of a story and how powerful of a message can you communicate?
So true. And in when you're being when you're being very personal with your story, sometimes I think people are embarrassed about their stories, right? Um, and sometimes they just do not know how to craft that story. One thing that I learned by through my research and my understanding of how the brain really works is that there is a particular reason why people are not always it's not always easy for people to articulate their why and articulate their reason their articulate their why and articulate their story is because that part of our brain which which is the limbic system is responsible is not responsible for language. That part is responsible for decision making but not for language. The decision making part is mostly is the soft side, which is the limbic system, whereas the the other way around, the soft side is the limbic system, the inner part which controls the why. However, the language is controlled in the more rational side of our brain, which is why when it comes to speaking and expressing our story, we use the rational part of our brain, which is the neocortex. We use that, and which is why that's the biological reason why it is so difficult for people to express their why. But the good news is that it can be trained. You can be trained on doing so, right? And that's something that each individual can discover various different self-awareness tools. Now, on that topic, since you spoke about being introspective, Shiraz, and gaining that self-awareness, is there some tip? Is there some tool that you would recommend to our audience today on how they can be more introspective?
Well, I think it's number one, be okay with being a little bit vulnerable, right? So I think
Hmm.
that's one of the hardest parts about, using a personal story as your message is you have to be willing to put yourself out there a little bit. And not everyone is okay with that. So the first thing is to get out of your own internal comfort zone.
Hmm.
Is each one of us, like I'll give you a sort of a non, business anecdotal example, right? But
Please, yeah.
yeah, I've always found that in every job or every career and anything that I've ever done in my history, there's always this time where I always think back and just really ponder on, oh my God, I'm in over my head. I have no idea what I'm doing, right? And it's usually in the earlier stages of doing that role where I'm like, I can't believe I'm allowed to do X, Y, Z, and I have no idea what I'm doing. So that's usually a good indicator as to you're going beyond and pushing your boundaries,
Huh.
right? So when it comes to, at least being mindful of introspection and being putting yourself out there, you need to be comfortable doing something that is frankly very uncomfortable. For most people, it's not natural. Everyone likes to talk about themselves, but
Yeah.
they put this like little shield up for the real hard
Mm.
personal stories, right? And what people view is that is a vulnerability, but in actuality, that is your strength,
Mm.
right? So if you learn and own that fact and bring it out, you can take something that you maybe perceived was a negative into something that could be an overwhelmingly positive situation. And this could be from a tough personal circumstance that is
Yeah.
very to you, but is extremely relatable. And that's why when people have personal stories attached to what it is that they're doing, they tend to do better, right? And then it also brings out the passion in what you do as well. Like all of this shows, and
Yeah.
somebody who's passionate, then technical competency is obviously always important, but it's kind of a given, right? So when you're looking to hire when I'm looking at a product or service, I'm assuming that either if it's a product that's going to do the job, or if it's a service that person is technically competent at what they're doing. That's not why I choose them. It's usually because either I like them or something about them resonated with me,
It's true.
right? So you have to be willing to put yourself out there in order to do that. And that requires you to frankly do something that is uncomfortable, which is put yourself out there.
Put yourself out there, right? Yeah. And that's so true. I think sometimes our own personal stories, we try to shield, as you say, our vulnerabilities, and sometimes it is those vulnerabilities that really bring out the best in us. One of my early mentors gave me the tip of, if you want to be introspective, Umar, think about writing your eulogy. And that was something that I did, and which really, really changed my perspective in life and made me very introspective and helped me. And it was one of the cornerstones of the exercise that I was doing to understand who I am and what I live for, and finding my why and my values in life. So that's definitely one tip that I can give to the audience as well, other than what Shiraz mentioned, which is to explore your and be not be afraid of being vulnerable and putting yourself out there, which is so true and very, very powerful. So Shiraz, on the topic of the whole psychology, we spoke about an entrepreneurial mindset. We spoke about um, being very personalized in your story. We spoke about being raising the bar of self-awareness. In your experience, you have worked with numerous entrepreneurs, right? What are some of the biggest mistakes that you have seen entrepreneurs make, and what we can learn from those mistakes?
Sure. So I'd say one of the biggest ones that I've noticed over the years is, in general, people unwilling to take a risk, right?
Hmm.
Is depending on, like, culturally speaking, I mean, I'm of South Asian descent. Being risk takers isn't ingrained in our DNA. That's not what I grew up expecting. My parents were all about get a stable job, don't take chances, don't take risks, et cetera, et cetera. And it's interesting that when I talk about risk, this is something that I think is inherited down generations, right? Like
Yeah.
we learn a lot about who we are at the dinner table. And usually we get a lot of what we are from our parents, and our
Correct.
parents got it from their parents, and so on and so forth. So it ultimately gets passed down. So effectively, we're kind of inheriting our parents' mentality when it comes to certain things, and we have a predisposition to certain things. So in general, at least I can speak from my community standpoint, most of us are wired to be employees. and not wired to be risk takers. So being an entrepreneur in and itself is a risk taker. It is going against the grain. It is not being that doctor, dentist, lawyer, or entrepreneur. You're not doing the things that everybody growing up thinks that you're supposed to do, right? So, I'm not an engineer. I'm married to one, and my dad is one, but I'm not a doctor, right? So it's not going down the conventional paths that most people would perceive as a safe career, right? So number one, be comfortable being uncomfortable, namely by being okay with taking risk. That's a big mistake that people make. Another one is, I'd say it's a controversial one because it's understanding the point of no return, and the decision that you have to make at that point. It's, do I double down and continue because I truly and fully believe in what I'm doing, or is it that I am just trying to bring this giant rock up a hill that is never going to work, right? And sometimes we can be blinded by our passion too. So, and it's a very delicate game that you play when you do that, right? Because as entrepreneurs, we're usually pretty passionate. That's why we took that risk, right?
Right.
So being able to be dispassionate at a time when you're very passionate is a hard thing to do.
That is hard.
So, do I double down and really see this thing through because in every fiber of my being is telling me to do that? Or is this my brain telling me and my heart talking instead, right? So that's where we have to really have that. I call it the gut check, right? So you have that gut check moment that every single one of us has. And ultimately I say that every entrepreneur will find out what they're made of. Like I can't even count how many moments where, your back is up against a wall. Usually it's financially because, most of us have a little bit of a war chest that you have when you start, but inevitably that runs dry. So you find you're at this moment where do I continue down this path? And I'm getting all the no's around me from everyone who I care about saying, what are you doing? Go get a job. Don't keep doing this. Don't keep going, right? So, at that moment, you kind of learn what you're made of, right? So really, if you can identify that point of no return for you, where it's I'm neck deep and I'm seeing this thing through whether it works or it doesn't, or do I cut and run and try my next thing? And it's a very delicate balance, and it's hard to identify. And sometimes we're too close to see it. So it maybe takes, an outside consultant or a trusted associate to be dispassionate and maybe tell you something that you can't see.
Sometimes you are truly blinded by your love and your passion for that mission that you're on. And that's so true. I definitely see the second one and even the first one, right? Like the lack of ability to take a risk. And that is, again, something that from a inheritance perspective, we have inherited from our families, from our upbringing, from our environment, from our teachers, and so on. Is there something that from a youth perspective, right? I have a lot of young professionals and youth who watch these webinars, who look at the videos on my YouTube channel. One of the questions I think they have always, kind of asked me, and I've never been able to give like a really great answer, but I'm going to throw this one at you.
Oh man, I'll try.
When you have parents who have that mindset of, no, you need that stability, you need to get that stable job, how do you tell this budding entrepreneur, young guy who wants to be an entrepreneur and not get burdened by the whole stigma of no taking risks and getting a job? How do you convince this person to take a risk and go against the grain or go against against the parents' wishes in a way? How does that happen?
Well, I mean, number one, it just takes fortitude of the person, right? So you have to be fairly strong with what it is that you believe in. And I'd say, look, if your passion is there, then you'll lead yourself to where you need to be, right? So if you don't believe in it enough, you probably won't take the leap and you won't go against people.
So true.
Doing what I do for a living was absolutely against every single family member that I had advice. But I'm a pretty strong-willed person, right? So I was willing to do it and I needed to do it my way, right? So it wasn't odd that I would find myself in an entrepreneurial role where I'm kind of the master of my own little mini domain. So that's kind of where I went. But, to answer your question, I mean, ultimately, if you believe enough in what it is that you're doing and you have that drive, the one thing I say that you need to articulate to your parents, especially if you're new to Canada. So I'd say if you're a Canadian, like I'm a first generation Canadian. My dad was an immigrant, but he
Mm.
came, to Canada over 50 years ago, right? So we've been here for a long time. And what I always tell everybody and remind them is my parents' generation, the risk that they took was coming here,
Right.
leaving relative stability where they were, or at least an environment that was familiar. Stable or not is debatable. But let's just say an environment where they're familiar, they had the language, they had their family, they had the people that they knew. And he came on at a time when, it's not like it is today, and literally was on a boat and came to Canada. And that's how he showed up here with very little. And that was his predominant risk in life, was
Yeah.
leaving relative stability for relative instability. And
Mm.
so it's not uncommon for someone who does that to, in their own career, naturally typically find something that is as stable as possible, right? So what I say is I want to make something of the risk that my parents took. They took that risk to come here. So it's my job not to play it safe. It's my job to swing for the fences a little bit, at least within reason, right? But give yourself a time frame, right? So if especially the younger, the youth, if you're, 17, 18, 19, 20, we have a long life to live here, right? So
Mm.
give yourself 5, 10 years to try something that you truly are passionate about. You have plenty of time to fall back onto a regular conventional career, right? So give it a go, right? Until you're 30, you don't really know much anyways
Mm.
either, right? So you're kind of exploring and learning and experiencing stuff. So try it. What's the worst that could happen? You fail, right? But failure is inevitable. The whole point is try not to make a habit of it, right? So what do you learn from it? And I think that's the whole biggest thing that people need to get over, is that failing at business and failing at an idea or a venture is not the worst thing in the world. We're trained to think that it is, because that's, especially South Asians, you can't fail, straight A's, etc. But failing is not bad. It's actually really helpful. You learn a lot when you fail. You're like, okay, well, I'm not going to make that mistake again. I learned something.
Right. And we need to kind of inculcate that kind of a shift in mindset, to really become a culture that has the hunger to take risks at some point. Because if we are always shielding our children and just always protecting them, how are we ever going to let them grow, right? So it's important. Those are some really, really good points, that you have to have that passion, you have to have that belief, and showcase it to your family, to your parents, that you have it in you. And at the same time, keep experimenting, keep learning, and not be afraid to take that risk and to fail. And even if you fail, there's no big deal.
Absolutely. One thing to remember, and and sorry to interrupt, but
No,
one
no,
thing to
please.
remember for some people and some viewers, right? So it may not be a practical choice immediately. Like you might not have the financial wherewithal to completely jump in with both feet. That's okay. Maybe your business can start as a side hustle. Maybe you have your stereotypical 9 to 5, whatever you need to do to pay the bills, but then in your off time. So I classify this as pay time and non-pay time. So during my pay time, which is 9 to 5, when I can do my job, that's when I do things that are going to further advance my current opportunity. And then in my non-paid time, which is my evening time, now it's harder with a family, but if I wasn't married and I didn't have children, then it'd be a bit different, because that's when I would be able to go and say, look, that is the time where I can do all the things that I couldn't do during the day.
Hmm.
So time block yourself, and maybe it starts off as a side hustle until you get to a point where it's starting to grow, it's starting to have its own feet, and then you can jump in
Absolutely.
with both feet.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Honestly, that's my approach right now, right? That's my approach. And I think I read somewhere, can't remember whose quote it was, but the quote was something along the lines of, you don't just grow between 9 to 5, you actually grow after 5 p.m. and before 9 a.m. And to me, that really resonated well with me, is the choices that you make, not during those 8 hours of your work, but it's what choices are you making in your life to truly grow and develop yourself outside of those hours when you are required to quote unquote grow, right? What choices are you making outside? And that to me, that really resonated well with me. It was powerful for me, and I was like, maybe at that time when I was in my post graduation rut, as I call it, the routine, honestly, the habits and the routines became, you come back from work, um, you chill out with either friends and family, watch some Netflix, eat, and then sleep, and that's it. And that's majority of us. That honestly is majority of us. And if I realize, if I want to be an entrepreneur, if I want to make a difference in this world, I need to start thinking differently, and I need to be a little bit more, take more accountability of my time, and be able to give back during, find ways and make difficult choices to let go of those Netflix habit, or to let go of those, just sitting in front of a TV and just chilling or something, and letting go of those and focusing on things that I need to do to accomplish the goals that I have put down for myself. So it does require some sacrifice as well, from what you're saying, Shiraz, eh?
100%, right? You got to be
Uh-huh.
willing to put yourself out there, right? So that's a big thing.
Yeah. Um, Talking about habits, right? Habits, as the saying says, right? Like the saying is, first you build your habits, and then your habits build you, right? So if you want to be an entrepreneur, the audience, if the audience who's watching us, they want to be entrepreneurs, they want to develop that entrepreneurial mindset, what everyday habits that you recommend that they can acquire to develop this mindset?
Well, I think it's more than one, right? So I think one of them
Yeah.
to be mindful of is a saying that I like to say that, we're all taught that to build a good business, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right?
Mm,
And it's a common quote that you'll hear business
yeah.
people talk about. But my version of that is that it may be a marathon, not a sprint, but in order to survive, you need to learn how to sprint a marathon, right? So number one thing is we all create all of these, what I like to call barriers. I lovingly refer to them as head trash, right? There's reasons why we don't actually engage and start moving forward, right? It's, oh, I need to build this deck. It needs to look this way, or I need to build it, or I have to refine my product more, even though it still works and it's still good, but I need to do, it's not perfect. The striving for perfection before you launch is, I think, the biggest Achilles heel of every entrepreneur, right? Number one, it just needs to be good enough, right? So let it good enough. And more importantly, it's the repetition, it's the habit. Like, you got to do the reps, just like going to the gym, you got to
Yeah.
do the repetition. So that's what I refer to when I say, like, you got to move with a sense of urgency, right? And I don't say being frantic and being frazzled, but, to a degree, like, I feel like, at times, to be successful, you got to behave kind of like a shark, where if you're not moving forward, you're sinking, right? And I always have this thing where it kind of got ingrained into me at a very early age. And again, I was fortunate. I had a really good mentor who still is to this day, but, always be being better, always be charging forward. And the one thing is, compete not against the competition, compete against yourself.
Mm,
Always try to be better than you currently are. So always redefining your own capability and your own habits. So I think of anything, sort of two things that I just came out of what I just said is, number one, learn how to sprint a marathon. And number two is keep redefining yourself, because what you currently are versus what you will be will always be different. So as long as you're just trying to be better than you currently are, you'll always be getting better.
absolutely. Look for where the puck will be in the future, not where the puck is right now, right? And
Absolutely.
one of the things, and from a habit perspective, I think personally for me that really changed my mindset was reading, right? I think reading really allowed me to think exponentially. And what I mean by exponential thinking, and this is actually something that I think it's important to also say, because a lot of entrepreneurs, they say, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you got to develop an exponential thinking mentality. And what exponential thinking really is, and let me try to explain it to our audience. It was like, imagine if I ask you to take 30 steps, in each step being 1 meter long. Most of us can probably predict where we will land after taking those 30 steps, roughly, give or take, right? This is how our brains have evolved to think. This is linear growth. This is linear thinking. This is how, our brain is wired to think. However, the difference between successful entrepreneurs and the non-successful one is the fact that the successful ones are able to think exponentially. Now, if I ask you to take those 30 steps again, but the only difference is that each step is now double than the previous step. So Shiraz, if you're taking each step which is double than the previous step, can you guess where you will land after those 30 steps?
Oh, pretty far away. I mean, exponentially growing. It's
Yeah.
But what's funny about exponential growth is that for the first little while, it's going to look like you're not even moving, and then all
Exactly.
big changes happen.
And then you're boom,
Absolutely.
right? And
You
after
find it,
those,
those as hockey stick charts where they look like this for a long time, and
yes,
then shoot right up.
exactly. It's like that. Exactly. So if you're in exponential thinking, if you're with that mentality, with those 30 steps, instead of being just 30 meters away, you will actually have been around the earth 26 times.
Wow.
Right now, I know it is really, really difficult to just even fathom that just to imagine this, because again, our minds are not programmed to think exponentially. And this is all thanks to evolution. This is just how our brains have evolved. It's all evolution. But the good news again is that we can all reprogram our minds to start thinking exponentially. And one of the first step is to start reading and to learn. The more you read, the more you know. The more you know, the more dots you can connect and the more problems you can solve. Because if knowledge is just power, then learning can become your superpower. So I
Absolutely.
think, to me, learning is very important. So having that kind of a exponential thinking and mentality is really, really important, and kind of also touches to what you do in the world of finance, where it's all about compound growth. And it's so sometimes difficult, I'm sure for you as well, so difficult to explain the power of compounding to your clients, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you brought up a really good point. So, absolutely, I couldn't agree more. Knowledge is power, right? So, you need to go out there, and that's what I like to lovingly call sharpening the saw, is getting better at your trade or your craft or
Yeah.
whatever it is that you're focusing in on. Where I think that the rubber meets the pavement for most people
Hmm.
is lots of people will do the reading part. The harder part is the action, right? So where what most people have difficulties with, like I'll give you an example. I
Mm.
give away some of my best ideas for free every single day to everybody, mainly because I know in the back of my mind, no one's going to do it. It's hard work. It's really hard. At first, I used to be really guarded, like, no, 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 my idea. I need to protect it like it's my baby. But
Yeah.
after a while, I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to give it out. No one's going to do it. Right. And the reason that's why most people are not as successful as they can be is that they may have a good idea, but it stays up here. Right. And they never really materialize that idea. I think that's what sets people apart is those who think and then those who do. Now, I'm not saying act without thinking. You absolutely need to think first. But the difference between those who are successful and those who are not is almost always in the execution. You have to
Right.
execute on the vision. Having the vision is step one, but then step two is to execute on it and make sure that you're constantly executing, then reevaluate, then maybe go back to the drawing board and then do it again. Right. But that's what sets people apart is you absolutely need to act. And I think that's what I think is the Achilles heel for almost every entrepreneur out there is they get stuck in what I like to call the head trash mode where they'll keep refining, refining, refining. I'm like, no, 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 you got to act, move, do the reps, get out there, start selling, tell your story.
Right. Yeah. And it's so important to get out of that um, mentality and be able to, just do the action, because practice is what makes progress. You don't have to aim for perfection. You just have to aim for progress. Better than yesterday, better than yesterday, better than yesterday. And that's so important. I love that. I really do. All right. So in terms of your whole the whole aspect of psychology and entrepreneurship, anything last that you want to advise to our audience that they can really walk away with today after today's episode?
Um, so one thing that you'll find as entrepreneurs and anybody starting your own business is you'll find that you get pulled in a lot of different directions at once. And
Mm-hmm.
it actually can be really challenging to be able to filter out what do I need to do? So if you were to talk about a task list for an entrepreneur are usually pages long, right? There's a million things that you need to do, and there's just not enough hours in the day to get it all done. And the weird part is that in some businesses, there's never actually an end. Unlike certain projects, or if you're in a transactional industry, you can start at the beginning and then finish at the end.
Right.
Uh, so one thing that I always find is that there's this never-ending battle of what I like to call urgent versus important.
Mm.
Right. And so some things are really urgent that you need to do, but other things are really important that need to get done, but perhaps are not pressing. And what ends up happening is that urgent always trumps or beats important.
Right.
You
It's
can't get
true.
lost in the minutia, right? So this is where we all face this. Anybody who's doing their own thing, and even any person in business will end up having that as a reality. So finding creative and clever ways to help manage yourself through that is really important.
Hmm.
Another one that I think is really important for people to be mindful of is what I like to call, this. I got this from my dad because he's very he was a very hands-on kind of guy. And he always said, measure twice, cut once, right? And that's what you'll hear that from all sorts of people. Make sure that you know what you're doing, check, double check, and then execute, right? But still execute, right? You still have to make the cut, right? So it's extremely important. I can't stress the importance of planning. That's what we talked about last time, right? Planning is super important, but where, the proof is in the pudding, right? So you have to go out there and actually do it too.
Yeah.
So I think that that's one of those things that we just need to be extra mindful of as well. And then I'd say the last one that we kind of touched on earlier today, but, either giving up too early or going in too deep, right? And
Hmm.
it's a delicate balance, and you never really know until after the fact. I mean, hindsight's always 2020, right? But when you're in the middle of it and in the depth, I refer to it as the gut check moments. When you have your gut check moment, A, you'll figure out what you're made of. And then B, you'll see how much do I truly want to see this thing through? And do I bail in on this idea and go get a job? Or do I bail in on this idea and move on to something else? Or what is my pivot point? So I think if you can walk away with knowing where you are in those three things, you'll
Mm-hmm.
be in a good position to be successful.
That's awesome. That's great. Some really, really good advice, especially the second one, measure twice, cut once. Kind of also reminded me of what even my parents used to say. When in exams, make sure you're double checking all your answers in your exam. Keep checking over and over and make sure there are no mistakes. Right.
But don't second guess yourself. Usually your gut's right. That's the other thing that I learned just in practicality in real life. But yeah, absolutely. Check and check again.
Yeah. In fact, there's so much more research that's coming out that now is actually saying that your gut is actually your second brain because just like in the brain, we have so many neurotransmitters, even in the gut, in the lining of the gut, there are over 1 trillion neurotransmitters.
Wow.
So, some researchers are starting to call your gut your second brain. So
Brilliant.
that's why your gut feeling is always important. So this is great, Shiraz. We have one question coming in, which I think we should start taking some questions now. We haven't seen too many questions, but guys, if you guys can start posting your questions now, that would be awesome. We will love to take your questions and start answering them for you. So the first question comes from Mashal Naeem. Shiraz, she's asking when you can use both failure and success to grow your idea or your venture.
Wow. That's a super loaded question. I mean, look, ultimately, we all learn from our mistakes. At least you should be learning from your mistakes. I should really qualify that. So, depending on what it is that you're doing, obviously, it's really going to be subjective to your specific industry. But in general, most of us can learn from our mistakes. At least you should be.
Yeah.
And then when you can do that, you'll understand and apply it. When I get to that scenario or this instance again, this time I know what not to do. So it's almost like a process of elimination, right? It's a way to refine and make your product better, right? It's almost trial and error. And to a degree, that's what failure is all about. It's about being in a position where you make yourself vulnerable. And then all of a sudden you see, okay, if it worked, if it didn't, what did I learn from it? I pick myself up, dust myself off, and go try it again. And this time, when I run into that scenario again, I'm not going to do that because it didn't work.
Sometimes do you feel like, because she also talks about the success piece, do you feel sometimes success can be our biggest enemy?
Sometimes. So I actually find that if you get successful really early, that can actually almost be like your own kiss of death, right? You almost need to have a degree of struggle. I actually think that struggle is super important. I mean, when you're in the middle of it, it sucks, and no one will say it's a good idea. But
absolutely,
it's almost like a rite of passage, right? Is that you need to go through the dumps to a degree so that you can get on the other side. Not only do you value the back end more, but it actually helps mold and shape who you are as well. It makes you more resilient. It makes you stronger. So one of the challenges that when people who are in a position where they've never been tested, I think that's one of the most important things you can do. That's actually when you grow the most, is that when you're put, between a rock and a hard place, you learn what you're made of real fast. So I think that having too much success early can actually hinder you to a degree. I mean, look, no one wants anything bad to happen to anybody. I would
Mm-hmm.
never wish, poor things on any person. But at the same time, I think failure is extremely important as a calibrator for all of us, right? It
Oh,
it
so true.
reminds us, right? If even as children, like you touch that, it hurt, you're not going to do that again because you remember that hurt, right? So remembering the pain is an important piece to help you avoid certain mistakes again. But
Uh,
too much of that as well, and holding on to it too tight can also be an Achilles heel too. So it's this delicate balance, and everything always is. But I actually think they're both really important, and you need to have some successes, and I like to call them even small wins to
yeah.
help you along and keep you motivated to continue. If you have nothing but failure and not even a small success, then that's always something you want to be mindful of too.
Right. I mean, I really like how you put that because it is a very, very delicate balance indeed at the end of the day. And that's why I think a lot of the executives that I speak to, they always don't just look for folks who have had a lot of success in their career. They are actually looking to hire and develop people who have tasted some level of failure in their life because they know that these are the people who will value success even more because they have gone through the grunt, they have gone through a tough time, a rough passage in their life to come out strong. So yeah, that's great. That's awesome. Shiraz, I'm not sure. I don't think we have any other questions for today from our audience, but this is gonna get recorded and be posted on the YouTube channel. So I really hope I'll be promoting this, and I really hope that a lot of people are get to watch this because this was such an awesome session with you. I really, really learned a lot. This was you just threw so many a lot of wisdom out there for us to capture on. And I really hope for those of you who listened in today, can take even 1 to 2% of it today and apply it in your life to be more introspective, to build that exponential thinking, to read more, or to be vulnerable, as Shara said, at least do something, act on something. One of the learnings that you have gotten from this particular episode to make that progress towards your next step in entrepreneurship, towards your next goal in your career without chasing perfection at the end of the day. Shiraz, this was amazing. Thank you so much for being on the show as a guest. It is an absolute honor. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. I really enjoyed it as well. And I do hope at least something was of some value to somebody. I recommend everyone at least try one thing. If there's anything that came through, try one thing. And hopefully, and again, I'm actually always available. I do apologize. A couple people did reach out to me after the last one, and I haven't had a chance to get back to them yet, but they're still read and unread in my inbox, and I will absolutely get back to you. Feel free to reach out. All my contact information is on my website, sartorialwealth.com.
That's awesome, Shiraz. That's really great to hear. Thank you so much once again. And for those of you who watched us today live, thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, see you guys.